So, but before I do, we've got some announcements, and the first one is what I have up on screen. We're going to try an experiment. Thanks to Xavier for taking the initiative for this. We've heard some feedback from a bunch of different people saying, in addition to the talks, which we get a lot of value out of, it would be great to have something that's a little bit structured to be able to get help on our Ember projects, ask questions, maybe offer help, that kind of thing. And so we're going to try out something that we're calling Hacker Hours. And it's similar to Hackfests that the Liberty Hackfest is run here. It's going to be a little bit different in that each of these Hacker Hours we're going to try to have what we're calling Ember Hackers in Residence. And these are going to be people who have more experience in Ember, who are willing to offer their advice and sort of mentorship to folks. And so for the first one, it's going to be this coming Tuesday at 6 o'clock at Red Rover's offices. I thought I put in that location. I'll add that shortly. Red Rover's offices on 23rd Street. And the Ember Hackers in Residence are going to be Mike Rosati and Andre Milan. Are Mike and Andre in the house tonight? Here yet? So these guys do Ember professionally every day, and I know Mike well, he's presented here, and he's a great guy and will be of great help. But we're going to try to do both because we're limited in space for this meetup, as well as because we want to make sure that we have a good experience and we can learn how to run it effectively. Is we're going to limit the number of RSVPs pretty tight. So there's actually only going to be 20 RSVPs taken for this first event. And we're going to learn whether that's way too few and we need more space, or to run it more often, or what. But we're going to do some experiments. We're going to make this great things for folks. So when I sit down after my first segment, I'm going to open up RSVPs for this. This event, in addition to being hosted by Red Rover, is going to be sponsored by Teutonic, who's going to provide food and drinks. Xavier is the CTO of Teutonic, so thank you to them for that. And whether you make it on Tuesday or you have other ideas about this kind of event, let us know. We're trying to do this just to help the community grow. So, any ideas on that are great. Speaking of helping the community grow, thanks as always to Pivotal for hosting us. Pivotal is for those of you who don't know, is a agile development shop that does a lot of Ruby and Rails work, as well as iOS, JavaScript, and a bunch of other stuff. They are almost always hiring, so if you want to work in a consulting kind of environment, Pivotal is definitely one of the best in New York for that. Obviously, great beer fridge and ping pong table, and great events that run like this that happen all the time in this space. And also thanks to Yap, my company who sponsors the meetup and volunteers our time for organizing all this stuff. And I want to also turn it over for a few minutes just to announcements from you guys. Hiring announcements of related events, other stuff that people should know about. Anybody has something that they want to share? Chelsea?
I'm Chelsea. I'm representing the Huffington Post. We're looking for a lead mobile web developer.
I'm representing the Huffington Post. We're looking for a lead mobile web developer. So if you're interested or know anybody that might be qualified, please reach out to me. Thank you.
Cool. And in the back?
Oh, Dave, go watch it. We're looking for a mobile developer, and we're also looking for a designer. So you can talk to me later if you want to find out what we do.
Awesome. Thanks, Dave. Let's go watch it. That you didn't hear. No? Yes?
Adam from LiquidNet, and we're also looking for a couple of JavaScript developers. Backbone now, currently evaluating Ember.
Are you guys using Ember or Go Watch It?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. Anybody else? Cool, terrific. So one thing that we're not going to recap is that there were a bunch of job announcements at hiring at EmberCamp, and Steph has actually pulled up a graph today of, I think from Indeed.com, of growth of Ember job postings, and it's in a month-over-month growth is like through the roof. So
Up and to the right.
up and to the right. Most graphs are good, not all.
Error rate.
Right. Okay. So with that, I want to turn the stand over to Matt Deal. For a second, we're going to show a new tool that they created called Ember Repo Builder, which is going to be really helpful to a whole lot of us. So Matt, up here. Matt. Oh, okay. We're going to do a demo instead. So something I forgot to mention is that we're recording video tonight. Thank you, Lee and Pivotal, and we're also recording audio for Geek Talk. And thanks to Pete and Josh in the back. So because of that, we're going to try to limit ourselves to this particular microphone tonight. So speak into it, and you can clip it if you need to type, and if not, hold it. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Howdy. So apologies, we were going to present this neat little tool that basically builds Ember master and puts it somewhere so you can use it in JS fiddles. So when you have JS bin or JS fiddle, so when you report a bug, you always have to then go and make sure that it hasn't been fixed on master. So this would provide you one resource where you have a URL that you can drop into JS fiddle and be like, oh, done. Now I can just assume that my bug is really master without having to clone the repo and build it and do all the other normal stuff. But we failed at, or I failed at Capistrano and Unicorn and RDEV and all the other bullshit that we need to do. So, we've been working with this company 2B for the last few months. Some other folks who are here. It's this interesting platform to allow people to create spaces and then share them with each other. So this is probably something that we really want to show off next month when we have some of the other ancillary features done. But the fields themselves, the creative spaces that you share, are pretty solid. So I think it's worth showing off. And it's all Ember. For a good one. Undefined. Demo time. Cool. And the screen resolution is lower than JavaScript course. So you create these spaces by bringing in images or audio and things like that. So I'm not sure if this one has any music on it. But So you can go into edit mode, and once you're in edit mode, you can take images that are actually on there, which you can just drag and drop in. You can move them around and do all kinds of things with them, change their sizes and stuff like that. You can take these and turn them into stencils, and once you turn them into stencils, find a nice layout for Mr. Calvin Coolidge here. We can get some paint. We get some paint. Spray painting. Throw in. And intentionally it gets a little bit messy. So you can go ahead and the paint should stay on top of it. Yeah. So that was just total demo. Okay. Great. So it's an interesting, great new platform that you can be able to use in a month, and all the bugs will be fixed. It is really cool. One of the neat things is that everything on this is actually an Ember view and a giant container view. So they all delegate responsibilities up to a stage view that handles all of the actual events, so all the drop events that come in, any of the interactions that you have with the objects get handled at this meta level beyond the individual views. When you turn something into a stencil, it changes the property, adds a stencil property to it, which automatically understands that it needs a new type of view that knows how to display a stencil with the drag thing to change the threshold and such. And that automatically flops in when the new view gets inserted into the field. So we've had some good challenges, and I hope that next month we can do a better presentation with some more tech background and stuff like that. That's pretty much it.
Awesome. Quick question while Christopher gets set up. For for you, Matthew. What was the sort of hardest part of this project so far with respect to your interaction with Ember?
So the hardest part, JavaScript-wise, was definitely doing lots of core stuff. We have lots of things where all the images and all the assets on the screen are going up to the cloud without touching our own servers. So that involves, there were a lot of problems with S3 that we had technically, and ended up going with Google Cloud Storage, which was much, much better for all of our problems. That's not really directly Ember related. The biggest confusion that we have right now is about scopes and controller instances. The biggest problem that we had was none. It's always been awesome. I don't know, like obviously the transition up to the new router was a little bit of a hurdle, but I don't think there's anything Ember-wise that was really a nightmare for us. Yeah.
Great stuff. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Except Ember did.
So next, I'm happy to introduce Christopher Steve, who is with McGraw-Hill Education Labs, and MHElabs was actually called out at EmberCamp as one of the companies that's been most helpful to the development process of Ember. So Christopher is going to demo what he's working on.
Hi everybody, I'm Chris C. I lead a renegade team of designers and developers to essentially help McGraw-Hill dig its way out of this textbook possibly not being around in 5 years thing. And we see a lot of the success in the MOOCs, massive open online courses, Coursera, and we think that that's a really good foundation for us to build upon. One of the most interesting things for us is, delivering a course online is one thing, allowing professors to use the tools that McGraw-Hill editors or instructional designer use to build the same course would be very interesting. So we essentially externalizing our own tools and give it to our customer and allow them to customize and essentially make their own course without having designed a deal with Coursera or somehow pay for a very expensive video equipment. So we are building essentially an online course builder. I will demo that in a second, and also an iPad experience to go with that, which is also an opportunity for us to experiment with doing Ember on the iPad, iOS platform. That's something Yap is leading the way. We kind of following the leads on that. So real quick, MHElabs has been working with Pivot Labs. So our development team is largely pivots. We obviously want to expand our team. We also have worked directly with Yehuda and Tom from Tilda, as well as with Eric and Patrick, to help us with some of the architecture issues, because we're really pushing the envelope of what you can do in Ember. We have maybe one of the top 5 most complicated apps in Ember so far, lots of code complexity and stuff like that. So we're very proud. We'll show you a demo what that looks like. The general vision is that we want to be able to give professors the ability to essentially create an entire course by nothing but dragging and dropping. So you can drag and drop your own material, you can also insert material from what you find in a discovery mode. So we'll search the McGraw-Hill repository, we'll also search partner repository, and obviously in the future, hopefully open source repository as well for open content. And once you drag it together, then you can view that and preview and edit additional annotations and the video as well. The goal is once you form the course, then you can have an iPad experience that use the same API of what you've constructed and allows you to go in and take quizzes and see what you've done. And then obviously, because all the content can be HTML5, we can flow it very responsively as you navigate through it, and obviously also share annotations and communication. That's the basic idea. Now, the app doesn't look this good yet. It will very soon, but I'll show you now essentially what we have work in progress. So what we have done now is kind of a wireframe-ish thing. We're still applying to visual design. The idea here is that you have a course hierarchy on the side. Everything you see here is drag and droppable, so you can change the order of the course. This is an overall structure. So I'm looking at cell level MG, and this is something that we call the intent view, which is kind of like the Pinterest style. The thumbnail thing is still being worked on. But you can now turn it into a more flexible view, which is what we call a structured view, where you can drag and drop and rearrange. You can sort of play back, rearrange the called structure. Now, if I want to add, and I don't know if you're going to see this because this panel is not really where I want to be. If I want to add something around, some other content, like let's say goat farming, I can drag and drop this content, and that's going against another repository, and then we can go ahead and play. And hopefully we don't have professors that sounds like goat. That would be very embarrassing. But the idea here also is that For assessment, which is a little bit more interesting, I think, we can also give the same level of tactile responses for multiple choice questions. So all of these things, I can mark this to be a correct answer or not correct answer. So I can create a new question, multiple choice. Like I can ask like, what is the Ember templating language, and you can put handlebar or whatever it might be, and you can mark one. And it's actually 2 correct answers now, right? It's handlebar and Ember. So, and when you're done with this, hopefully I don't screw myself up. You can also set how many points this is worth. The magic of binding, so that updates immediately. I publish that, and then I go to the student view. Please demo God have it show up. Otherwise, I won't blame you, Will. Take the test. And then now I have the same question that I answered, and when I send it back, the instructor can just score it. So all of this is done in an Ember application with backend of Rails. It's very cool, like, so you can just create new lessons. So I created this new thing called Future Ember McGraw-Hill. This actually is the future of Ember. Right now we support, if you go back to adding a card, so add a card. We support some native types, video, images, PDFs, and document attachments. We want to support not only our own JavaScript apps as cards, so these are like modules we put in, but also any third-party JavaScript app. So we've been working on a container framework, and Yehuda and Tom is actually working directly with us in making that happen. It's actually really exciting stuff. How do I scale this console? So what it will look like is that instead of using an Ember app, you can actually using a wrapper that will actually persist the data for a third-party card. It could be a graphic calculator, it could be a presentation tool, and then we'll save the data into our Ember data adapter. So we're basically providing kind of parse-like storage in context of the course. So that's pretty cool stuff. I'm not allowed to announce anything because we're going to announce something next month about exactly how that works. And we learn a whole lot from Yehuda and Tom, so this is something, a word from Yehuda and Tom. Assuming YouTube doesn't screw.
Computers. Oh, hey there. Didn't see you walk in. Hi, I'm Tom. You may recognize me from TV. Hope you guys enjoyed the Ember New York meetup, and for anyone who couldn't make it to EmberCamp, I'm sorry we didn't see you there, but hopefully you got a good recap here with all these lightning talks. Chris is just a really fantastic guy. He's been supporting the development of Ember. We've been working closely with McGraw-Hill Labs for the past year developing a lot of the cool stuff that you just saw. If you need a great job working on Ember apps, talk to Chris.
So that's Medici, and we will have more stuff, and we'll roll out new iPad apps that's using a very, very cool communication layer between the Ember apps and Ember data and the iOS native stuff. You guys are doing something like that. Hopefully we can collaborate on that. Steph has been incredibly helpful in helping me, giving me feedback along the way. So if you guys are interested either as, to join us full time or do some projects with us, we are willing to sponsor people hacking Ember, assuming Yehuda and Tom say, yes, you can hack Ember. Not core team, but obviously something. Not everybody's good at Steph. That's it. That's my talk. Awesome.
Ross can get it set up, and I just want to say thanks to Chris for his support of the community and the platform. You guys have done a lot and been very generous with your time, energy, and money, and we appreciate it. Next up, we're going to have Ross Kaffenberger talking about using Middleman to deploy your Ember app, which I've never done or even thought about before, so I'm excited to see what he's got to say. Go to arrangement and mirror. That's going to be your resolution. Yeah, this should be good to go. Close this down and zoom out, take picture slides.
Title of the talk is create and deploy an Ember app in 5 minutes using Middleman and Heroku as your tools. Spoiler alert, I don't have a video from Tom and Yehuda, but I hope it will still work out. My name's Ross Capper. I work at a company called Challenge Post. We host technology competitions. So if you need any inspiration about a side project, you're looking for something to do, come to us. You can enter an app that you're building or something you're thinking about and potentially win some prize money. So the goal for this talk today is to think about tools that you might use to get up and running quickly with Ember and to get it out and deployed quickly as well. So not so much about the code of Ember itself, but I think this might be a good way to think about getting an app, a front-end app, up and running quickly. So the concerns here don't involve a back-end. You just have basically what is essentially a static website that you want to deploy easily. So the tool I'm talking about here is called Middleman. It's essentially a static website generator, but it's enhanced with modern web development tools. So some of those might be familiar if you build stuff on Rails or something similar. So some common tools you could use would be to get a site up and running quickly with Middleman and it. For your development process, you would spin up a server and you would use build to get your assets built for deployment. Some features it uses or takes advantage of include rack. So it's easy to set up your project with some configuration. You also get the asset pipeline, so things like sprockets and basic compilation tools, Haml, SAS, CoffeeScript are available. And one really cool thing is you can hack on a template. So if you have a basic layout for a project that you want to get up and running quickly, you can basically put that in a Middleman template. And I've created one for Ember to basically out of the box get you up and running quickly. So you can clone that into a local directory that Middleman will look for. So when you create your project from a template and hit the server, you can basically have your working Ember app running in a few commands. So that's what it would look like if you deployed the template that I provided there. And so now let's say we skip the part where you've actually built something interesting and you're ready to deploy it. One other interesting tool that is lesser known about Heroku is you can create something called a build pack. So a build pack, what essentially a build pack is a bunch of scripts that will instruct Heroku what to do when you say git push. So there's a default build pack used when you have a Rails app that you're deploying that will know how to compile assets and spin up a server. For Middleman, we need to give it a little extra information. There's some build packs available on GitHub. So by creating your app and pointing it to the proper build pack, you can say git push Heroku master and have your static site deployed with Ember. And then you can submit it to Challenge Post where you can hopefully win a prize. There's some resources here if you're interested. I'll post the slides online so you can check it out. There's my info. That's all I got.
Awesome. Thanks, Ross. It is pretty amazing the tools that we've got available today. Is Michael Madrid? Awesome. He's all set. So this is Ross showed you sort of how to get your app up. One of the questions that I get from a lot of you Ember developers is, oh, how do I deal with authentication in an Ember app? Because we have our sort of conventional way we dealt with for years, but if we have all this logic in the client, it sort of like boggles the mind for a little bit at first. And so that's why I was really excited to hear that Michael had put together a sample project just showing how to use Ember with Rails and Devise. And so he's going to show that to us tonight.
Okay, so I'm also and like Chris, this is not going to be one of the 10 most complex Ember apps. In fact, might be one of the 10 simplest.
Okay, so my name is Michael Madrid. I'm an independent developer working on a bunch of my own projects, most notably a karaoke-related application. And I'm going to talk tonight about using Rails and Devise with Ember. So how many people are doing Rails? And I assume most of you are using Devise? A lot of you? Just a few. And of those people using Devise, do you use Ajax or just canned Devise? You do. Okay. So for those of you using Ajax, this is fairly, this shouldn't be any different. It's going to be fairly generic for other things too. Anyway, so, when you use, it used to be back in the day, you used Devise with Rails, and you get the canned forms, and you just filled out the forms, and Devise magically did everything for you, and you logged in. So when you're using Ajax, it's a little different, a little more complicated, but not really that much. The first thing is you need your application controller, or rather, you need your Devise controllers to be able to respond to JSON if you're sending Ajax. Now, since Devise controllers inherit from application controller, you can just add that to your application controller. It should be good. The second thing is you need to set up Devise to be able to send a user object or whatever you have defined your authentication object to be back to your client. And you can use the active monitor serializers tool seems to be the accepted way of doing Rails with Ember. So it's very natural that you just use that. If you don't use that, you're probably going to have a lot of problems. But you may have to override Devise controllers. That's something I did in an earlier project, and it would not be something I recommend. We'll look at code in a sec, but just to go over on the Ember side, basically the main thing you have to do is just to write the Ajax calls. Once you're done with that, and all the Devise stuff is basically done. Let's look at code and then I'll talk about using it. Okay, so that's your application controller, just as I said, to respond to JSON. For your serializer, this is really wonderful. You just, if you set up active record serializers, and you write a serializer, this will go in a directory called serializers. You can just do everything here. You do not have to go into Devise. So I did a simple one here. Your usual things which you expect in this dummy message, which I just put there for illustration. And we'll see that when we do it here. I guess we should look at that. Okay, here is the app. As you can see. Okay, watch this. Login, entering, wow. Welcome, test user. Notice up here. Yeah, I noticed that. It doesn't seem to fit. Hey, I'm showing the JavaScript console. No one else did that. Notice up here that your login just disappeared. You've got a out button. You can notice also down here, you're just here for fun message, which is in the serializer. Is it appearing? Okay. Log out. Let's see. Okay, so does that seem fairly, let's look at the code for the, on the Ember side. How did we get Ember to send those wonderful calls. If you've done any jQuery with Ajax, this should be familiar. Basically, you just really need to have the proper URLs and, of course, send what you want to log in. I'm doing one thing which is a little something you might want to do with your application. That is, I'm passing the Ember route into this function. And the reason I'm doing that is because I couldn't figure out how to do this transition without doing this. Now, of course, instead of doing it like this, you could pass in a handler function where the route transition is all encapsulated. That would be a lot cleaner, but for the purpose of this demonstration, I thought it would be good to see what's going on with some Ember stuff in there. Another thing I'm doing here is we're using a StateManager. StateManagers used to have a much larger place in the Ember universe, and now they're kind of being shunned to the side. The router used to be an Ember StateManager, and that's changed. So it's not exactly clear to me where separation between routes and controllers and state managers is. I figured I'd put one in just for one other issue you might have, when your app loads, if it's logged in, you probably want that to appear, right? So, for instance, just log in. And if we click on the app, reload the app, we want to, yeah. We should be okay. Here we go. Yes, okay, good. We're still logged in. Now you could do that, you could set up an Ajax call after you've loaded the app, making 2 calls. If you wanted to do it with just 1 call, you could do something like this. That's not even the right application. Right down here, this is the application layout. So right down here, I'm actually calling this, I'm populating this call with current user JSON. And if you look at the application controller, so if there's a current user, and this is a Devise thing, if you are logged in, Devise will supply this current user, and if not, it'll be null. So if you have it, it will populate that information on your page. If not, it will just have a blank thing. And then down here, this init app, which got called on that page, is just looking for the current user. And if there is a current user, it's defining it here. And if there is a current user, this login state manager will do a transition. So that's the basic login part. I can go over the Ember part, but you can look at the app. It should be fairly easy to figure out. One last thing is I am developing a flashcard app in Ember, and this is on GitHub. It's going to be open and stay open. So hopefully, we always get these to-do apps with 1 model, or at the most 2 models. And you see just very little about how to do real things. So I'm hoping this will be simple enough that it's understandable, but at the same time, a little more, not trivial. So anyone who wants to help with that, and just go to GitHub, kagemusha, this example is there. everything else. Pretty much everything I've talked about tonight is in my project that is on GitHub. Thank you.
Michael, thanks so much. That's great. And just while you're here, and Alex, you can get set up. Step this way. Are there any sort of special security concerns that you're thinking about when you're using Ember with something like Devise? Or
I'm at the stage where I've got it to work. It seems to be that everything in Rails. I'm not a real security expert, so hopefully it's.
well, probably shouldn't use YAML. Probably shouldn't use YAML.
How do you deal with the cross-site request forgery stuff?
Question is, how do you deal with the cross-site request forgery stuff?
I really didn't. I assume that was done, but in other apps I've tested things like tokens. So that would be part of what you sent over.
I think often in an app, a situation like this, you would do like $.ajax setup and pull your CSRF token out of head, for example.
I've done some things like that in other apps here.
Awesome, cool. Thanks so much, and thanks just for contributing this stuff to the community. It's awesome. A couple of more notes before I turn it back over to Alex. Just to note on the sort of idea of like feeding current user down when you're rendering your index.html page. We do this also at Yap. Started doing it recently. It certainly makes a lot of sense. We stick it into a meta tag, stick the JSON into a meta tag, but then our different Ember apps or whatever app we're using kind of pull that JSON out of there. Seems to work pretty well. And then the other thing I wanted to mention was, Michael mentioned the role of state managers in Ember, and this is the topic that's kind of dear to my heart, and I asked about at EmberCamp. So I just want to share with you what I learned about that. So it's true that the old router in previous versions of Ember was a subclass of state manager, and that the new router is not. And so I asked Yehuda, so does this mean that state managers kind of is less important, a little less relevant going forward? And he said not at all. He said like conceptually, what's important to know is that conceptually the new router is a state machine. It is a state manager, and it has the same kind of hierarchical event handling that State Manager offers. And what had happened with old router is that when the router became a subclass of State Manager was getting more and more functionality in it that was only there really to support what router needed as a subclass. And so over time it became clear that this is kind of polluting the purity of what State Manager implementation, and it would be better just to keep the concepts of State Manager but not force this inheritance hierarchy. And so what we've found in our apps is that it's awesome to have your core router, but it's also really valuable to have extra state managers, and Asha talked about this last month a bit, and I think that Michael's example and this Devise example about having a state manager for login is a great example and can be really useful. So I just wanted to mention that, and now I'm excited to turn the mic over to Alex Machinier, who's going to talk to us about the Run Loop and about some contributions he's been making to the Ember ecosystem.
Okay, so my name is Alex. I run a design shop out in Brooklyn called Useful Robot. I'm here today to talk about the Ember.js Run Loop and also just some kind of contributions I've been making to package these JS loops that we normally run, like Ember handlers and to little lightweight gem packages to hopefully solve some RB and JS dependency out. So without further ado, who here has used the Run Loop before, has basically used their knowledge of it to, I don't know, make some optimization to their app. Okay, good. Who's never heard of the Run Loop before? stuff. It's definitely never heard that before. So basically, a run loop is a really kind of crucial piece of architecture in Ember. And it's used for a lot of different things, but in general, it's a mechanism for scheduling and coalescing computations and events and operations, actually. And so some of the main things that Ember boasts of, some main features that depend on the run loop are resolving data bindings. So Ember, when it first came out, sort of immediately advertised in the back end, you could basically specify that data is bound between a view and a controller and a model, and you change it in one place and automatically gets updated everywhere else. So there's got to be some mechanism that knows how to take that information and basically push it to all the different places it needs to go. And Ember internally uses the run loop to do that. In addition, you get some things for free, like preventing repeat computations. If you tell the run loop to schedule this one thing to happen later on, and you give it a function and some arguments to call, it will prevent that from happening multiple times, and you can basically just make sure that, okay, at this point in time, when all these bindings have been resolved and all these DOM elements have been gained through the screen, run this thing one time. And if I built the app in such a way that this thing will be scheduled multiple times, only do it once. So that can come in handy every so often. And also, I'll go into it in a second, it's a way of kind of grouping these kinds of similar computations into a same group so that you can basically take advantage of some optimizations and not do things in a very inefficient order. So, some people hear the run loop and they think it's something that is just magically running in your app all the time with some while true that just kind of constantly runs and checks like if something has changed, take it to run this thing and take that value and push it wherever it needs to go. But a while true loop in JavaScript doesn't really make any sense. At some point, it needs to return control back to the browser. So unlike some server that might run in this kind of style of being while true, check if there's something in the queue, pop it, and then do something with it. The Ember run loop is not just somewhat while true. It is actually a discrete event. You can execute it, and it begins and it ends, and then it gives control back to the browser, and then you can listen for keyboard events and so on and so forth. So basically, if the run loop is a discrete event that runs every so often, when does it run? Well, Ember's kind of already got it set up for you that for the most part, you don't even really need to think about it or know about it or care, because all of the mouse and keyboard events that you might use, click and mouse leave and all this other stuff, that automatically, basically, all those event handlers will be run in a run loop for you. And I know I'm sort of jumping ahead, but let me talk about a little bit more what that means in a moment. So when I said that the run loop basically was kind of grouped these computations together, what that actually means is that when you schedule some action to happen in the future, like take this value and move it to this other thing that it's bound to, or render this DOM element, you have to basically specify which queue of similar computations it belongs to. And there's 6 as of now, and maybe there'll be more in the future, probably not. The first one is basically used for resolving these data bindings. And so the first thing a run loop is going to do is going to go through every event that's in the sync group, run that, and then proceed, once all of those are filled out, to the actions, which isn't used all that often, but we'll talk about it in a bit. And then the third one is render, which is basically where all of the DOM elements get rendered by the views. And then after render is something that isn't really used internally by Ember, but you can use it with this technique that I'll describe in just a little bit. And the other two don't really matter. I don't want to bog you down with too much boring information, rather get something a little more practical.
One thing else, timers is used for Ember later.
Really?
Pretty sure.
I grabbed it. Check it. It's really important. Here's the mean. Here's a view. So, I think the Sprout Core one did. I think Ember does something a little bit different. Sorry, there's a debate over whether this is actually used. I say it's not, but we'll see. It has problems here. So, anyway, this next slide is basically about the basic algorithm, which I sort of went through, and it's not even useful like staying on this slide. But basically, if you have something that runs in the run loop that you tell Ember to set this value, that's going to wind up in the sync queue, and then the run loop's going to go through and say, look at the sync queue, and go through all the little callbacks that are scheduled in there, and perhaps running that little callback in there will schedule something in the render queue and then the actions queue, and then basically, okay, so the algorithm is basically go through each queue, and it's going to basically flush the same queue. Then it's going to look at actions, and then maybe it'll perform some callback. And if there's some callback in the actions queue, which schedules something in the sync queue, well, the run loop algorithm will basically check after each computation whether there's stuff in the preceding queue that hasn't been flushed yet. So you have this kind of behavior of like, okay, perform all the callbacks here, and then I'll schedule stuff here, and if at any point if something schedules something earlier in sync, start the whole thing over and flush sync again, and you basically just go back and forth, back and forth. It goes back and forth on itself until everything's just finally resolved. So you sort of get a sense of how that can be useful for all these changes that can kind of dynamically happen and then kind of get pushed all the way through the app using this pretty reasonably simple algorithm. Any questions so far before moving on? Good? Okay, so why do we care? There's definitely some practical times where you just need to know about this thing. In general, as I said earlier, a lot of the events, like the mouse events and keyboard events, Ember is just kind of going to wrap that stuff in a run loop for you automatically. But when I say wrap that in a run loop, basically what I mean is you'll kind of start a period where it's watching out for these kinds of changes, and then during which time, while your code is running and scheduling all these things in the queue, in the run loop queues, at the end of it, Ember is going to basically go through and run that big, giant flushing algorithm that I was just talking about. So most of the time that happens automatically, but there are some times where you're going to need to basically wrap a callback in the Ember run loop. And a few examples of those are, if you're using some jQuery plugin that does some weird manipulation with the DOM, and I'll get to an example in a little bit, then it's, in a lot of these jQuery plugins, you basically specify, you provide in a callback that'll get run at some given time for some event in that jQuery plugin. Another example is, if you're not using Ember data and you're using jQuery Ajax and has a success handler, you're just basically want to wrap everything inside of that inside the run loop because, as I mentioned down here, it's usually nothing crazy catastrophic is going to happen, but you might get some non-deterministic behavior, and it's going to be a little bit harder to debug and test when things go wrong. So basically, for the most part, Ember's got you covered, but a few of these examples and a few sort of esoteric mouse and keyboard events, apparently mouse wheel does not get wrapped automatically in Ember run loops. That's another example. So when I say wrap, what does that mean? And fortunately, we have the help of Vanilla Ice to inform us how to wrap. You use Ember.run, and you can optionally pass it the context, which will be the this variable when the callback is run. And I got that right. So yeah, so basically you pass the this function object, and what that basically means is that when this guy gets run, by the end of it, it's going to go through that giant flushing algorithm that makes sure all the data gets to where it needs to go, and so on and so forth. And like I said, if you forget to do this, it's usually not too crazy catastrophic, but it might schedule this flush to happen a few milliseconds later, depending on how your app's put together, or some things without breaks. So look out for that, and just be safe and always wrap. Wow, I wasn't expecting that. Thanks for that, Ice. I think he's my inspiration for those sultry lyrics. Okay, so yeah, so just to hit the bullet points here with this isn't like an async operation. This whenever when we pass it that callback, it runs right away. It's not like it runs it later or anything like that. But the main thing to keep in mind is that it's always going to run that little flushing algorithm afterwards. And things as bottled in as you can, rather than forgetting to use the wrap and letting all the non-deterministic weird stuff happen. So, more interesting use case when you might actually care and decide just to foolproofing your app with the non-deterministic stuff. Say you want to use a jQuery plugin like Masonry, and Masonry is basically you can take a div filled with little children. Take sub-elements in the div and basically block them out on the screen according to how tall they are, and some infinite scroll. It's kind of like a Pinterest effect. But in order to, the way you activate this plugin is to call it on the parent element that already has all these sub-elements rendered, and they know how how big they are, so it knows how to lay it out in the grid. So it might be tempting to use if you're writing a collection, which of course renders an array of elements, it might be tempting to just use the did insert element, and we do here, but the problem is you can't just call masonry right on the inside of this did insert element, because at that point none of the children elements have been rendered, and you're basically telling masonry to go ahead and lay out a parent element that doesn't have any child elements. So what you do here, if you can recall back to my showing an interesting slide about how many queues there was this sort of neglected queue called after render, which Ember doesn't, which Steph reminds me to point out, was contributed to the Ember code base by none other than Amelia, solving a similar masonry problem, no doubt. But it's usually the same kind of pattern where you basically want something to run after all the child elements have run. And one way that you can do this is basically schedule events in the after render queue, which is otherwise not used because all that stuff happens in the render queue right before it. But if you want to have something happen, like after all the DOM elements have rendered, you can use this and basically schedule one event, which schedule once doesn't really matter here because it's not like there's going to be multiple things, multiple did insert elements in this particular collection you have. But it's still a good cool pattern. You want this thing to happen one time. So you schedule once. And by the time that you're in this, all those child elements have already been rendered in DOM. You can just basically pass a parent element to masonry and all that stuff will just magically work. Any questions on this? This is why I'm running this sort of thing. There's some lovely patterns that are out there, but this one works pretty well. Yeah.
One thing, if you do want to use schedule once pattern, then the function reference should actually reference that the run loop can compare. So this is an anonymous function. Anytime this node is called, it's basically a new object.
Okay.
You want to point to the same thing every time. You want to schedule once to
actually coalesce. Okay, so Luke was saying, unlike what I have in this example here, schedule once is basically going to be smart enough to see if there's already an identical function and set of arguments in that queue. And if so, don't run it twice, just run it one time. But the way I have it set up here is passing an anonymous function object. So it is basically creating a new function object every time, so none of those comparisons, if I run this twice in a row with two anonymous functions, it's going to make two functions rather than the same one that just calls this some user. So I'll alter this example to refer to some named function or maybe some method I've defined on this collection view stems. So that's one thing to keep in mind. So kind of covering everything. It's a very crucial piece of architecture, the run loop, and a lot of different things that can run on it, most importantly the data mining stuff, I would say. And I didn't say a whole lot about the fact that it groups these related operations. You don't want to mix your DOM renderings with the part of the Ember Run Loop that pushes all the data to all these different places, because DOM renderings are slow, and if you're constantly going between reading values and feeding stuff to the DOM, then things can get really slow. So group all those together. And, by the time you want to run your DOM elements, you want to make sure that all the data that's going to be painted the first time is actually there and already flushed out as much as it can be. So other than that, make sure to be careful and always wrap it, and and use after render if you need to do any trickery with child elements rendering, and so on and so forth. So there's actually one little minor portion left of this, but any questions on the run? Yeah.
I just have another word that is used for run loop. We usually define it when testing the JavaScript system that Japanese. Basically, anytime you set your binding, expecting that to be there, you're going to have to.
Right. That might be worth just a quick little. So what he was saying is that there's another really important time when you're going to want to use Ember.run and then pass in a function that's going to perform some change is if you're in test cases. And most of the time when you're writing an Ember app, you don't immediately need some value to be immediately to have its bound value like percolate all the way through the app. You can usually just let it get there when it gets there, and then it'll show up in templates and you don't really have to worry too much about this. But for something like a test case where you want to render a view with a certain context and make sure that it came out the way that you expected, you're going to want to wrap that operation that changes that data on the view in Ember Run Loop. So, for example, if you're testing some collection view that was sort of a view variable, and you wanted to say view.content or whatever, get content. Of course, object.
That's what she said.
Nice, yeah, we got more. So basically, if you want to test that this actually got rid of one element, we would want to take this and do it. What's that? Fun loops, yeah, that's a really another non-smooth, well, another way to for loops. So you would do something like this, and what this basically means is that when view's content array gets one item lopped off of it, and right about here, when it's about next to the function, that's when all that flush logic stuff and algorithm I was telling you about happens. And you can then use jQuery to see if that element that the view contains has actually updated and gotten rid of the elements. Because otherwise, if you just have it like this, that flushing portion by the time that you test jQuery right here hasn't happened yet. So you might be looking at an old, outdated state of the DOM, and this is one way that you can write test cases. This is consistent with what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, or if you set something and then it's binding, so you can do that and check the back.
Right, so when you are also just setting objects in general that have bindings, and you want to test the sort of destination property that it's bound to, that's another time where you're going to want to wrap the setting changing function in a Ember Run Loop, and then test its value outside of that run loop after it comes. So that's a lot on the Ember Run Loop. Thanks for bearing with me. Yeah?
I kind of use the Ember Run Loop as a hammer. The things aren't working. It's not working. Hammer. Is there any sort of documentation or anywhere where I could look to sort of do things the right way instead of resorting to the run later hammer?
It's hard to say what my, so the
I
question or observation was sometimes I use the Ember Run Loop as a hammer to basically bang out some weird bug that's acting weird.
I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I was doing was refreshing data in the background on the schedule. And I wasn't using the data, it's like the identities objects on file. So when you replace the content, you can flip it. You'd remove the content when you replace it. So I applied that Ember Run Later hammer, it just worked. But maybe there's a better way.
I mean, actually, that might be, so he's describing a situation where I'm using Ember data, and some of the data came back from the server, and when it got re-rendered, there was a noticeable flicker in the DOM renderer, right? I mean, I don't know for certain, but that could be an example of the original way you had it wasn't in an Ember Run Loop, so some of that non-deterministic stuff was happening, and one phase might have cleared the DOM, and the second phase was populating all the DOMs again. I mean, I'm kind of blue sky here. Right, but if you really want to kind of iron out behavior, I mean, again, the pattern, the good habit to maintain is just for any of these callbacks. I'd say you can always wrap it in Ember.run, but that seems most likely what was this. Any other questions on Ember Run for this one last little thing we need to talk about? Yeah.
Can you describe run next? How is that different than after render and when you use one or the other?
So if you're inside, if you're just calling Ember.run and you pass that one function, if you're inside that function. And for some reason, I mean, the question was, what is Ember.run.next, which, I had examples here demonstrating Ember.run, but Ember.run.next is a separate little function that you can use sometimes. I don't really know I feel like there's always a way not to do that, and maybe Luke and Steph could speak to a contrary opinion, but what it basically means is that you want some operation to happen on the run loop, and that whole flushing algorithm, you want to have it on a separate run loop after the current one that you're presently in. And I guess it's sort of similar to being like a set timeout with a 1 millisecond or something like that.
That is exactly how it's implemented.
That's apparently exactly how it's implemented. So you generally don't, there's probably a better way to do it, basically.
I guess after render is the way to do it. Like when, that's how I've used it in the past.
Yeah.
In place of after render.
And that's probably why we got it, because no one wants to use Ember.run.next when we have the after render queue. Everyone good on the Ember run loop. Okay, so the next thing I have to talk about for leaving the stage. Basically, I've been kind of hard at work on some changes, some recent contributions to the Ember code base, and so a month ago I was presenting on this one templating language called Emblem that I wrote and put together with a sleepless 5-day hackathon, and I've spent pretty much the last month actually trying to work on, improve, and make it possible for everyone to quickly just add it to their project, Ember Rails or whatever kind of third-party plugin you might be using. And I just quickly ran into this ridiculous dependency hell, which I guess can sort of be summed up in this scenario where, I guess a month ago, wasn't it? Yeah, so a month ago, Ember was on pre-4, and it depended on handlebars RC2. And when the release candidate for Ember came out, it bumped the version of handlebars that it depended on to RC3. And a lot of people, the following 5 days got all these, when they tried to update their apps, got all these errors saying you were using an old version of the handlebars compiler with a new runtime, you can't do that. All this kind of predictable nonsense that happens when you have crazy dependency hell between Ruby and JavaScript. So the problem was there's all these little helpful gems that think that they're going to be the only ones that want to bundle a version of JavaScript inside of it. Ember Rails, who uses Ember Rails? Showing some decent amount of people. That internally uses a gem called Barber to do your handlebars pre-compilation, and that's got its own little version of JavaScript inside of it. And when the new version of Ember comes out, you're probably changing one place where you're suddenly using the new Ember code, but that gem's still got the internal bundled JavaScript inside of it. Anyway, boring stuff, but what I ended up doing was wrapping all of these, like the entire Ember.js code base, Ember.js, Ember.min.js, McGraw-Hill, and all these other little things that are included if you ever try to build the GitHub repo. I just wrap that into a gem that does nothing but just contain those JavaScript files and give you a really lightweight Ruby wrapper to help you locate where those files are once you install them. So the reason this is cool is that rather than having this crazy 5-day heyday after a new version of Ember or handlebars has been pushed, well, let me give you a sort of example. I don't usually slides explaining what I'm saying right now. But the reason this is cool is that if you just have the handlebars and Ember libraries that you're using in these gems, all you need to do is just go to your gem file and specify a new version of Ember source or handlebars source, which is the names of these little wrapper gems. And just to give a quick little example, I got this is the Emblem test. This is the page, and I think the server already fell asleep. But this is the little demo I put together for the templating language, and it has a lot of the same dependency problems, or at least it did when the big switch from pre-4 to RC1 came out. And so here we can just check to see what the version is of Ember, and it's RC1. And before, if you actually wanted to change which version of Ember you're using, you had to look through all the gems that depended on that internally bundled Ember, and then make sure to change the version of that gem that you're using. But now you can do something. If you want to go back to Ember source pre-4, you can just uncomment this guy, do a local update on Ember source, and hopefully this won't take 20 seconds. And then restart this thing. And now when we run this guy, and it's going to take 10 seconds to load. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When we look at the inspector, we can see that everything, for one, it just worked. There's no weird handlebars mismatch nonsense. And Ember is now to pre-4 version. So what you want to do is just use these Ember source. Let's see, I listed them up here. if you're tempted to ever like write a little gem or a little helper thing that puts a version of JS inside of it for handlebars, Ember, Ember data, or whatever, just use these gems instead, and they'll basically contribute to a very happy realm of development that is hopefully kind of dependency hell proof when new versions of Ruby or JavaScript libraries come out.
So this is great, thank you for doing this. Is there a way to, if you were using non-released versions of Ember, like Ember Master, a way to take advantage of this or no?
Someone would ask that. Presently, you have to multi-patch the little like 7-line RB file that wraps these things, but that multi-patch gets used by all the other gems that are using Ember source and Ember source. So I can write a little bit about that. Probably the next version of those dash source gems should have an easier way of specifying a different path where all these JS files live. But with some easy multi-patching, you can get around it in the present. Automatically be used by all the different Ruby libraries that happen to use Ember source, Ember source, and so on and so forth. Any questions? It's been quite a long time leading up here.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex.
Great, Cohen, this is the moment that you've been waiting for. We're going to take a quick little break after Ray's segment, so if you're thinking about getting another drink, just hang tight for a second. Hey, we'll also, if you are a speaker in this segment, we're running a little bit behind because we've had such awesome content in the first half. I'm going to ask you to try to get through your presentation relatively quickly. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the first real-world version of Tomster. Tomster you're probably familiar with from the Ember website. The attendees at EmberCamp got in their little goodie bag a stuffed animal Tomster, who is useful for lots of things, including asking questions to when you're stuck on a tough Ember programming problem. So I'm gonna summarize the keynote, which was delivered at the first thing in the morning at EmberCamp by Tom Yehuda. And Ember is 2 years old now. They showed this slide, which is the traffic to the Ember.js website once the new router and new guides were announced. And I think that this is going to take us another jump with 1.0 release candidate being released as well. Job trends I indicated earlier, another example of the growth in the community. Another thing that's really catalyzing growth and awareness is the peep code. Who here has seen the peep code? Wow, holy moly. Jeff's business is pretty amazing. As it should be actually, because he does an amazing job. This video was so well done. One of the things that really struck me was how much of the syntax and most of the new router stuff was literally like less than 8 weeks old that is shown in this video. But this is really good, and as Ray mentioned, the examples in this peep code are going to become part of the test framework for Ember, so that throughout the 1.0 release grant cycle, and 1.1, 1.2, etc., those examples will not break. So those of you who have been using Ember, especially in production over the last year, have gone through a lot of bumps, a lot of churn. This is not lost on the core team, and Tom Yehuda and the rest of the team are really dedicated now to bringing some stability to Ember, so that we can build on top of a stable platform, and we can grow a larger and larger community around that platform. That, by the way, does not apply to Ember Data yet. Ember Data is still going to be in the kind of mode that Ember was last year, so be aware of that. But totally great. This peep code is, if you haven't seen it, please definitely check it out. Ember is one of the most popular repos on GitHub. We've closed almost 2,000 issues. I think we're recovering on Ember around 100 issues. Peter wagging it, staff is doing a great job just knocking through issues and closing them out. As Ray mentioned, Ember 1.0 RC candidate was released at EmberCamp. I think we were in RC 3. Still at 1. Okay. Still at 1. And again, there were a lot of people that I've spoken to over the last year who said, you know, I'm not sure, should I be using Ember now? It seems really cool. I said, you know, unless you're ready to be reading commits on a regular basis and, you know, and upgrading, I would say wait for 1.0. So, you know, this is what people were waiting for, and now is the time to get serious about it if you're in that category.
If you find a bug on RC1, jump to master, because we are fixing them as quickly as we can.
Yep, so as Steph mentioned, if you find a bug in RC1, check it out on master, because we are fixing them as fast as we can. 200 is the number of contributors, people who have commits in Ember. That's awesome for a young project, and we would love to see that number get higher. So definitely commit. We've been a bunch of people since the 1.0 release candidate that have been making documentation contributions, which is fantastic. Even if it's just a misspelling, that's helpful. And Steph's going to summarize Peter's talk, which is how to contribute. This slide was, I can't even remember what it was, lots of different aspects of Ember. So we are using, I mentioned the P-code integration test. We're using semantic versioning for Ember. What that means, if you're not familiar, you should read the spec. But basically, until 2.0, there will be no breaking API changes. New APIs may be introduced at 1.1, 1.2, etc. But no APIs will break to 2.0. Docs are getting better and better. The API on the website is getting more beautiful and easy to navigate. There's a bunch of more stuff being worked on, including interactive code samples, which will be awesome. There's a lot of outdated information online because of the churn that we've gone through over the last year, and Milwaukee is organizing a campaign to sort of help those articles get flagged so that as outdated, people can come and get fresh information, not get too confused over it. So the message is now is time to start building. We talked a little bit about discourse. You heard it demoed discourse, particularly how well it handles URLs. When discourse was announced, there were a bunch of haters on the internet looking to say, oh, it's in a single page web app. You screwed up on URLs, and the fact is, it actually handles it beautifully. I'm not going to demo it, but if you've got a laptop, just go check it out.
And SEO.
And SEO too, they handle. So they talked a little bit in the keynote, which I'm not going to go in deep, but about the future of the web and ES6 and what Ember's role in sort of helping to drive that and also being able to take advantage of that is. He is on TC39 and helping to define that and using a lot of the experiences of this community to help make our better actual browser platform. Web components also going to be awesome because Ember embraces HTML and CSS. The direction of web components is that you're going to basically be able to define your own HTML tags that have more robust behavior, widget-like behavior, if you will. And because Ember is built on top of that HTML ecosystem, the web component system is going to just work. Also working on introducing more layered APIs. Anybody tried to use app cache? One? Me too. It's a pain in the ass. Yeah, it did not work too well. So the idea is that if instead of being one size-fits-all API, that we're more layered, and that would be much better. And we're sort of with these MVC frameworks, we've got these cow paths where people are sort of walking in this well-trod path. Now, the job of TC39 is let's just sort of start to pave those cow paths. I kind of like that analogy. So one of those things is proxies would let us go from post.getTitle to post.title one day. Like, it's actually out and then all the browsers support it. So observers also get to native. URLs we talked about. Most other MVC frameworks treat routing as a tack-on concern. And so here we're talking about how it's not. Remember, URLs are core to what makes the web, and that's why it's core to building an Ember app. 200 contributors, a lot of companies involved. We saw McGraw-Hill earlier. Living Social was called out in addition, in particular. and the core team was announced. There has not been an official core team before. It was sort of informal, and so with the 1.0 RC candidate, core team was announced. Peter Wagener, Stefan Penner, who's here in the front, is a New Yorker. Happy to have representation. Chuck Lockey in Chicago, Yehuda, of course, Chris Selden, who lives in Seattle but works with us at YAP, Leah Silver, who actually organized EmberCamp, did a fantastic job, Eric Grin, who's in San Francisco, and Tom Gale in San Francisco. So one of the things that is the idea of this core team and expanding the team and expanding committers is that this is not a project that's designed to make tilde millionaires, Tom millionaires. It's not a project, it's a project that is philosophically owned by the community. We're after having a bus factor, no bus factor of one development project. The only person where that's the case today is probably Peter, who handles a lot of the build process and stuff like that, and will be working on that. And so to that end, they sort of defined what the path to core is, and that's basically contributing pull requests through the standard sort of GitHub process, getting to know folks, and it's basically a meritocracy. And they would love to have more and more companies and individuals involved in the project, make things better. They called out a few companies that have been particularly helpful. I mentioned Adipar Edition. Adipar actually filmed EmberCamp and is announcing tonight, maybe not yet, very soon, that at adipar.com/Ember videos of the segments are available, as well as slides of many of them. These are the sponsors of EmberCamp. Thank you to them. Meetups are happening in more cities than just New York and San Francisco, in case you didn't know. They are growing. There's ones that have sprung up that are not even on this list now. And the New York meetup was called out at EmberCamp as a shining example. And also thanks to Matt Grant, who designed the Ember.js website. Not a lot of designers do open source work, and it's awesome that Matt does it. Does such a great job at it. And then there was a job seeing one more thing, which is the Ember Inspector. And if you haven't seen this, it's going to be pretty awesome. So it's a Chrome plugin that basically, as much if you're a web developer, if you're using Ember, I know that you know the Chrome dev tools pretty well. This plugs right into that and lets you do things like look at computed properties, hover over Ember views and see what they are. It's pretty awesome. It's in the early days, but you can clone the repo and you can turn on dev mode, install it, and try it out. And you did a little bit of a demo. We had a YAP for DevSwag is a project that Leah runs that has a bunch of fun stuff that raises money for open source projects, want stickers or t-shirts, etc. Did a bunch of job announcements, and I think that is it. Thank you. Without further ado, our next speaker up, who is Steph. What? I want you to do both. Okay. Steph's going to do 2 talks on UI patterns and on contributing to Ember. While he's getting set up, any questions on the Keynote? I covered a bunch of stuff. Hopefully pretty straightforward. And like I said, you can check out the slides and video. Okay, awesome. How about, out of just curiosity, show of hands, how many people are running 1.0 RC? One. Awesome. And how many people are running an older version? Okay, good stuff. Well, we have at YAP, we have one project on master, and I don't know, three projects or so on like a mid-December number, which we're looking forward to. Here's the plugin.
So Steve Jobs is rolling in his grave here.
And Matt, you're going to be up next. Yeah, no other thing. You are after that. So we have 2 Macs next. right, here we go. I'm Steph. Ooh, that's loud. Anyways, we're going to do a quick summary of a few talks today, but as of not yet, so don't tweet about this because Adapar would like to have credit and they would like to be the first ones to actually announce this. Adapar.com/Ember, they have all of the talks from EmberCamp. So I would suggest looking at some of them. They were fantastic. Anyways, this is basically the summary from Peter's talk. His talk was on contributing. So who here has contributed to an open source project before? Awesome. Who here has contributed to Ember before? A few people. Why are there not more contributions? All right. So the big thing is anything can be a contribution. Talking to other people about a project is a good thing. Spelling corrections is incredibly valuable. So if you are reading docs, if someone's reading docs and something doesn't make sense, it's an issue. It is probably just as bad as a bug, because if someone tries to learn something and they see documentation that is incorrect, they will do it incorrectly and it will feel like a bug. Right? So you see a spelling mistake, see a bug, just contribute. That can be in the form of a pull request, just an issue that's pointing out the problem. Right? So the next step is when you are issuing an issue, it's very important to realize that the people that are potentially entering or processing these issues have a very small amount of time. You have potentially a lot more domain knowledge in the problem that you're having. So whatever you can do to get other people to understand your problem will make it much likelier that that person is going to help you solve your problem. So what I'll do, or Peter, or pretty much anyone that browses through the issues, is we will look for tasks or issues that have fiddles, that are well documented, and we will solve those first. Mainly because to get into the mindset of a problem that's obscure, it requires so much energy. I might have fixed 3 other bugs before I can even understand that this is a problem, or it might not even be a problem. So steps to do this. If there is a code problem, you're running something, it executes incorrectly, please, with the best of your ability, try to consolidate this into a JS fiddle or a JS bin, a quick demo, so that the person working on the issue can see what the problem is really quickly without having to jump through 1,000 hoops. Chances are, if don't have a fiddle, and it's not clear, your issue will just get closed. It doesn't mean we don't value the issue, it just means that there aren't enough resources to do so. Now, you don't have to be on core to do this either. You can easily peruse through the issues. You see something that needs clarification, it doesn't have a fiddle, say it. Hey, it'd be great if you added a fiddle here, or if it looks like the person's having trouble, try and help them by adding a fiddle. What was up for Peter's talk? Does anyone have any questions about how to contribute? And why is no one not everyone?
What's a good way to get started contributing as someone who hasn't contributed to it?
That's a fantastic question.
Repeat the question.
I should repeat the question. So if you've never contributed to an open source project before, how do you get started? Well, it depends on what you're comfortable with, right? So a lot of first-time contributors will contribute documentation work because they're learning the framework as well. And as they're reading, they notice that there's typos and there's bugs and there's maybe something that's not clear or out of date. That is a fantastic way to get started. As your maturity grows, or maybe you have some great knowledge that can help out, have a proposal, open up a dialogue about a contribution that you'd like to have. Try to be very clear and concise, just so that other people can take in the information quickly. And chances are someone will try to work with you to make sure that this does become a feature, or maybe they'll work with you to help you explain why this doesn't really work. Does that answer your question? And more technically, if you're interested about how to contribute, I'll gladly talk to you when we have beer later.
Cool. So I know that you and I sort of briefly talked about this. I ran this idea next to somebody. I would be happy to sit down or just schedule some time a week or weekend and just sit down with somebody who wants to sort of dig into some Ember code, and we can just go through some of the really easy, low-hanging fruit issues that are on GitHub. And that's definitely, I don't proclaim to be that really knowledgeable of the Ember code base, but it's something that I feel like would be good for the community and good for you if you look at that code before we get involved to give that a shot. So I'd be down for just something like pair programming, and I'm hoping that anybody else might think that's a good idea, who knows a thing or two of what the Ember code base would be as well. So if that sounds like something that interests you, I'll be at the bar. But anybody else who would want to
So Luke is going to make me repeat the question, and I'm going to say no. Alex brings up a wonderful point, and that is contributing doesn't have to be something you do in your basement, right? You can easily contribute by going to a place and meeting with other people that would like to contribute. I often pair program with people in San Francisco, in Berlin, everywhere remotely, and it totally works just fine. It can be a very good social sort of experience, plus you're learning something, plus it's cool, plus you can travel and stuff. And yes, I totally agree. If anyone wants to sort of, these hack evenings would be a great indicator for this. So come to the hack evening if you'd like to contribute, as well as have questions. Any other questions about contributing to Ember and or other open source software? Nope, all right. I was only partially responsible for this picture. This was mostly Peter Wagenet's fault. So the second talk was actually a fantastic talk, and I'm really not going to do it much credit. But I strongly recommend that you watch the video. It's actually, Trek has a great way with words. Trek has a great way with instructing people how to deal with technical problems. And I strongly suggest you go through his material. A lot of the documentation work that has been done for Ember has been done by Trek. Anyways, so Trek's talk is basically about UI patterns. So who here has used a calendar widget before? Who here has thoroughly enjoyed their encounter with the said calendar widget? So Ray is crazy. But a good kind of crazy. Who here has used more than one calendar widget before? Who's used more than one in one project before? Who's tried to configure a calendar widget before? Right? Who's been like, screw this, I'm writing my own calendar widget. And then use 2 other ones too. So there is clearly a problem here. And one of the big concerns, I guess, about people going to Ember is like, where's my calendar widget? My jQuery one kind of works, but where's my Ember calendar widget? Well, people really hate it when I say this, but there's actually no plan to make a Ember calendar widget. Now, before you guys are like, what? How do I need my calendar widget? The plan with Ember is really to accidentally maybe make it really easy to have a calendar widget. The plan is to make composable primitives that make it so simple that if you want a calendar widget, there potentially is one pre-composed, but you can take it apart. Why? Because when you use these calendar widgets, they're all different, they all have different concerns. Some are good at this, some are bad at that, right? And quite often the configuration code. I think he thinks I'm in Chicago. Whatever. What was I saying? So quite often if you look at some of these calendar widgets, like 80% of their code is configuring the calendar widget. It makes no sense. It's like Microsoft Outlook. 80% of the options are configured in Microsoft Outlook. Anyways, so the goal of Ember is to continue to build these composable primitives to the point where building a calendar widget is so simple that you don't have to care if there is or isn't a calendar widget. And at that point in time, if we do in fact provide an official calendar widget, you can decompose it as you need to. So that's great, but where's my calendar widget? Right? We still don't have one. So there's a long path towards this composability. Ember is becoming much better at this, but there's still some places where it really does suffer. If you jump to Angular or something, it is actually really simple to get some of these small components. It might be hard to customize them later. With Ember, usually it requires good understanding of the framework to really have a composable unit you can share. That sucks. But this is something that everyone is working towards. One of the projects that is sort of aligned with this is the control experiment. Has anyone here played with control? What did you guys think?
Oh, we loved it.
You loved it?
Yeah.
So the idea of the control, a little bit more of an advanced topic, is basically, in Ember, it's kind of hard to have a unit of composition to move around, like a calendar widget. It's kind of a pain in the ass. The concept of control is to allow you to do this. Turns out it's actually a little bit of a hard problem, but it's being worked on. Anyway, so Trek goes on to give some awesome demos, and I'm totally butchering this talk.
Great,
so bad.
great quotes.
Yeah, great quotes. Just watch his talk. It's going to be much better than this. Because there's one demo I would like to quickly show. I cannot find it. Anyways, that is the lackluster end of this presentation. Please watch Trex. Please watch Trex, and totally forget that I even was here talking about anything.
Matt, let's get
One more thing. If you guys have tough Ember problems, if you buy me beer tonight, I might help you. Awesome.
Also, if you have questions, like yours about contributing, Peter's talk went into sort of specific detail about ways to contribute, how to contribute and stuff as well. And I love the idea of using the hacker hours to help get people started with that process. I'm sure that Mike and Andre and Xavier will be into that too. Matt's getting set up, he's going to talk about an Ember data talk that we had. Yeah.
So you're talking about hacker hours? This is like an established thing that people know about?
I announced it at the beginning of the evening when you were working on your slides. If you go to the meetup site, it's now up there, and RSVPs are open. And like I said, it's extremely limited numbers for the first one as we just start to experiment with this. Sign up, try it out, tell us what you think, and we'll make it better and figure out the right schedule for it.
Anyone see that this lock is from Alcatraz? So there were two really good talks at EmberCamp about Ember data, and the harder one is the one that I've chosen not to present on, because it was really hard to present on. There's another talk just about problems with Ember data, which basically boils down to the problems the things that Ember data is trying to solve are really hard to solve. And there's lots of edge cases and lots of things that are going to be only for specific use cases. And trying to make a tool that abstracts every API in the world into an object relational model is going to be even harder than SQL was. It's just going to be a big mess for a while. But it's Ember data, and we know and love it. So Dan Gephardt gave a talk, which I thought was pretty good, which really, there's Dan, and there's me, and Dan has his own blog where he has a bunch of good stuff. He had a really good article about Ember object and understanding the primitives that go into Ember. Just a really good one to read. Take a look at it. But Yehuda said that trivial choice is the enemy, and I think that was like the really good quote catchphrase for his talk. Ember data is trying to take care of a lot of things all at once, and it does that by the same thing from the Rails history. It really tries to encourage conventions that you just follow, and if you follow those conventions, then everything will be cool. And then from here, Dan went to talk about how active model serializer can make some of this stuff easier for you. So Ember data makes some choices that are kind of really hard to change. You probably don't want to change. Like your records are always going to be canonical. So if you ask for a user, it doesn't matter what the relationship is. The user is always going to be the user, and you're never going to have two things that represent that same user. And then the adapters and serializers, the default REST adapter and the Digital serializer. There's a fixture adapter that uses fixtures in memory, which is kind of nice, but really those are the only two mature adapters. I think there's an Elasticsearch one as well on GitHub, but they're not like well thought out. Like I don't even think there's an XML serializer. So if you want to use an XML API, I don't think there's a robust way to do that right now. JSON is pretty much what you're supposed to go with.
Why would you do that to yourself?
And then it expects servers to follow certain conventions, which obviously is not all servers. But REST endpoints and JSON, again, are two pretty narrowing things, although everyone in this room is probably pretty comfortable with them. It has conventions for metadata, IDs, and stuff like that. Including the root element is a little bit of a quirky thing that's kind of specific to Ember. It's pretty easy to work around if you just subclass the REST adapter and write your own REST adapter, but it is built in. And then Active serializer will give you all this if you use Ruby, which is great. At the end of his talk, he went back to the edges of where the convention is kind of falling apart right now. And this is Ember data, and really in most things that consume APIs on the client side, dealing with issues of pagination. Authentication is still kind of a big messy thing. Like there's no, this is exactly how you do it all the time. Sparse field sets and custom includes, I'm not even sure what those are. And then polymorphism is one that we're definitely struggling with right now. Is what if you have a bunch of things that you want to list, but they're all different types? How are you going to deal with that? And Ember data doesn't really do that. It just says, I have this thing and I want to find them, and it assumes that they're all going to behave the same. And that's obviously something that, even in Rails, is tricky to understand and to use, and it's going to be tricky to understand and use on the client side. So I just wanted to quickly run through one thing that you did. If you haven't used Ember data before, this is a pretty basic example of how the open-ended relationship would work. So you use these data store.hasMany. Data store is like the data store namespace for all of Ember data. And it'll go ahead, you have your model, you extend it, has many belongs to on the other side. And then in Ember, you can use active model serializers, which will, again, provide all these conventions for you, so you don't need to think about them so much besides the rest of the endpoints, just make them sensible. Embedded IDs says that I want to return all of the IDs that, if I have a relationship that's a has-many, I want to include all the IDs when the response comes back. And include true says that I want to add these things in along with the response. So if I have 3 users, I want their IDs to show up, and then I want the actual users to be included in the response as well as a separate block of data. And then the post serializer just explains that this is the content that I want to be serialized. When I'm showing this post, I want to include the comments, and from the comments, I want to include the post. And that's going to yield some JSON that looks like this. We have the comment IDs, which is the embed IDs. And you'll notice that that's in the application serializer, which means that we decided that's a convention for all of our responses, not just for these specific ones. And then the comments are the individual comments that we had. And they're kind of, I'm going to say side-loaded, even though that's probably a bad use of the word, but they're brought in parallel to the post. So the post is a key that says I have this one thing, and the comment says I have a whole bunch of these things, which are comments. And Ember knows to take comments and instantiate as comments, and post and instantiate as a post. So Dan went over all of this stuff. It's crazy. He went into lots of detail on how these relationships work and how the JSON looks in between them and how active model serializer works. So I heartily suggest you to take a look at his slides if you're going to start using Ember data and you want to get a really good handle ahead of time on just what the JSON is going to look like and what your server should behave like and all that other really good stuff. I'm just going to run through a couple that I found really useful because, to be honest, I really don't need to look at the JSON that much, hopefully. So I'm going to run through custom keys and URLs and transforms, and here we go. So custom key, if you come back and you have a title of post, you have this weird key, but you know that you want that to actually just be title. You're consuming API that you can't change, or some crazy person just decided to call it title post. You can go ahead and you tell the adapter that you want to map. You just tell the adapter is the thing that knows, right? Because the adapter is going to take the data that comes from the server, and it's going to deserialize it. So that's the JSON serializer, turn it into an object for you. And then the adapter is what's going to know how to map all of that information in that object onto an actual record. So the adapter is a really powerful spot in Ember data. And when you're doing customizations, you're probably just going to be inheriting the REST adapter and making your own changes for how your specific app wants to take objects in JSON and turn them into objects in the Ember world. So we go ahead and just tell keys when we do a key. And important to note that Dan's slide uses some syntax which I think is just a little bit old because things move quickly. But this should be the more final, not really going to change API for this stuff. Another one is custom URLs. So we use this for things like API versioning. So we have like an API/1 namespace that will offer API calls during. So when we spin off a new one, we don't need to worry about the URL stomping on each other. So you can go ahead and specify namespace again for the adapter, because that's the thing that's going to take care of moving things in and out. You can see that it inherits from REST adapter, and then it sets itself as an adapter on store. Adapter, unlike store, is not magically turned into anything. You have to tell the store that this is the adapter I want to use. You could cheat, and you could actually take the SRS adapter, and you could reopen it and set the namespace right on it, but this feels a little bit cleaner. And then down the bottom, you can see you do default store, you find it, and it comes back with the prefix, and then on the bottom again, if on the adapter you had set a URL, so if under namespace we had a URL key, then you can specify a prefix for all of your requests to go to a different API, which would be cool if you wanted to deploy your whole site just up to a front or something like that on CDN and just make all of your API requests somewhere else. Custom transforms are really useful. You can go ahead and basically come up with your own data type. So down on the bottom where it says message, DSAT, or excitable string, every time a string comes back, it's going to go into the, from the server, it's going to go into deserialize, and then every time it serializes, it's going to go back and add an exclamation mark as it goes to the server. We use this for, we had a simple object for it. We had a bunch of values that were just coming back as JSON that were then going to be turned into objects. So you can make a simple object, and then your attribute just turns into another object that you can pull things off, which is kind of cool. But you can use it for all kinds of serializations. If you have a special, like, say your server has a special understanding of date format, you don't need to worry about that in your controllers or anywhere else. You just put it in here and come up with our like custom date format serializer or transform and be done with it. And those are the 3 things. So there's a whole bunch more stuff. Those are the slides at the bottom, and then a code base that you link to, serializers, and then he recommends, and I would recommend Stack Overflow if you have like lots of burning questions. Some of these things are not even resolved, so if you put the questions out there on Stack Overflow, that's not only is it a good way to maybe get a response that's an answer, but it's also a good way to get other people working on the code to see your issue and know that it exists and maybe do something to address it. That's pretty much it. Awesome.
Thanks, Matt.
That was like the most important part of Peter's talk, and I forgot it. If you have a question.
If you have a question, issues are not for questions. Use Stack Overflow. I can't believe that was like the all important part of this talk.
Cool. Now is an especially important time to put these questions about Ember data out there too, and needs, etc. Because Tom and Yehuda are going to be working 3 days a week over the next few months on Ember data in particular. And happy to turn it over to Matt Burdish, who's going to talk to us about testing Ember. And sorry, one more thing. This is the last talk of the evening, so after this we'll wrap it up and we're going to head over to Central Bar. Cool. So how many people do normal day-to-day test-driven development? How many do that in Ember?
Well,
Not really. How many people do unit testing in Ember? A little bit. How about integration testing? All right, hardly anybody. So what I'm going to talk about is what Joe talked about, which is how to do integration testing in Ember. So we're going to talk a little bit about how the 2 kind of techniques that we have, Capybara, probably everybody has heard of if you're a Ruby person, and then kagemusha, which is a separate little magic thing. So we probably all use Capybara to talk faster than we go over here. But Capybara is like super, super slow, and the tests flicker all the time for some version all the time for you. But this is kind of by design. This is the way that Capybara works. So Capybara has your test suite that runs and opens a connection to the database. And then it spins up Selenium and Firefox, which has a connection to the test suite. But it's actually a bi-directional connection because they talk back and forth. But then in order to actually make requests, you have to have another server that runs because Ruby is single processing and threaded kind of thing. So it's been another thing which also talks to your database, and this other stuff here is bi-directional too. So it's really easy for your tests and the test suite and the server and the runners and all this stuff to collaborate. And so that's one of the reasons why Capybara in general will never be not flickering. Because just like the architecture of it, the core of it, is just, it doesn't work this way. It works fine for Ruby and Rack stuff, but not for some JavaScript things. So some strategies that she provided that we use where I work is we try to do in Capybara full stack stuff just to the database and back. So on Capybara is when let's create a user through Ember. So I'll click a little user button and I'll verify that it like hits the database and all that stuff. And then I'll make sure that I can fetch it again. And I'll do just the basic stuff to verify that my API and my server are all talking together all in one nice little piece. And anything that's finer grained than that, I'm going to stick on my front-end tests. So if I'm like, well, if the user has to have a certain permissions level in order to edit this thing, or if like when I edit this thing, does it pop over here, does the panel slide in and out, all of that stuff I'm going to do in kagemusha because it's faster and I don't have any of the inherent problems that come up with Capybara's architecture. So kagemusha is packaged as a Rails. It's essentially a Rails gem. It doesn't work
backend isn't Rails, you've got to do some work to extract it. It's not that hard, but it is a certain amount of effort. And it comes bundled with Mocha.js, which is a testing framework, and then Chime.js, which is an insertion library. So we have to use CoffeeScript, pretend it looks like JavaScript, like that. So Mocha provides something very similar to what you would expect from like our describe, collections, int, send, plus. But in of itself, that doesn't do anything. So you need Chime to actually have it do some sort of assertion that this element should contain review request. So I'll show a real quick demo. So this is our test suite running under kagemusha. And as you can see, it runs in there and it shows like a little preview window of the app going as you're running all of your tests. And it just goes all the way down and it shows, oh, it takes a little long, side window for some reason. And it can just go through and show all of your tests. The really kind of interesting thing about this is you can open one in another panel and it will just run it. You can see the code, not the work test. And you can actually even inspect this and play around with it. You can interact with it if your eyes are that good. That's awesome. Yeah, so essentially this is the whole app running in this little tiny iframe. So that's fun. It's kind of silly, but it's also fun too. This is just a break task that's running. And it just sets up a little sort of break not serve. And then in CI, you can break run, and that will just run the CI version of it. Yeah.
Is this, when you run your tests in the browser, is that going to the database? It's not.
No, and I'll talk to you about that. It's actually, we're using fixture data that we're loading up in the app. So here I happen to be using Firefox, and it pops open a browser window. It's using Selenium WebDriver here, and it taps into the same. So this is doing the rake pipeline stuff, so this takes quite a while to build the app every single time. But there you go, you get your little dots. So it behaves just like all of your other RSpecs and all that stuff in your CI server. So I'll kill that. So is that a good color scheme? Like, is that better than ours? I don't know. So here's just a little bit of, and I'll talk to them a little bit. You've got a spec helper that lets you configure it a little bit, and I'll talk to you about some of this stuff. We want to turn up animation. It's about some of that. So in fixtures, what we do is we generate a bunch of JSON that is all of our fixture data. And we maintain these tests, these fixtures, not by editing all this crap by hand, but having a little rake task that we can use factory girl and we can do all this magical stuff to, in a nice declarative happy way, generate all of our fixture data, and then we hacked. Well, we didn't hack, we just made a little rake task and we can rake to run. If it detects that this is out of date, it will regenerate the fixture data. So what that allows us to do is operate decoupled from the tests. We stub out some of the store stuff to just not send anything to the server, and so everything just works because we're not actually persisting things, we're not testing that as part of these tests. As I said before, and Joe's recommendation is to do all of your end-to-end stuff that goes from Ember back to your server in Capybara so that you've got it all in one place, but then everything else that happens in the browser is all by itself in this little self-contained world. So that's why it's faster and easier to kind of maintain. So, why is kagemusha faster? There aren't any page loads. It runs in an iframe and then it tears down and kind of, it resets itself, and there are ways that I'll show you how to do that in Ember. So it doesn't have to keep reloading everything, which is why Capybara is so incredibly slow. It's 100% synchronous, so it doesn't do any waits, which I'll show you later. Someone will talk about Ember.run. And there's no full stack thing. It's all done in the browser. It doesn't go out and do all this other stuff. So on Joe's talk, this is what she had, the old and busted, as Matt said, like, Ember changes in like 2 weeks, and all of a sudden this stuff that she presented doesn't make any sense. So if you're not on Ember Master, you just kind of defer readiness and you have it wait until you've loaded everything up, advance it. But now the new magic is you just say Ember testing is true, and then in your before all, you initialize your app, and then you do all your setup between there. Same thing with the router. You transition to certain states in order to do some stuff that isn't working. Well, you don't need to do that anymore. Now the new magic is the reset method, which has been mythical for such a long time, which now apparently works. I don't know. That's famous last word. So that's what we've always wanted, you know, as a way to like reset my application state instead of going back to the index all the time. And so supposedly this works on master, but you know, use with care. Same thing talking about the store. You need to recreate it and destroy it every time. This is what we do. Now I don't know if you have to do that, but I'm pretty sure you do. I'll skip over a couple of the stuff. There's just some kagemusha stuff which you can read in her slides. We talked about the run loop to timeout, obviously, in your tests. You want it to be deterministic, so you know everything is going to be stuck in an Ember.run, so you just get used to writing that because it will. You'll get like a really weird error if you try to do something outside of the run loop, and so it's pretty obvious what you did. I think it's can't operate on that one or it's an Ember. It tells you. Yeah, there's an auto run thing that tells you that you want to run this in Ember.run, so you'll get used to that. Turn off animations because they suck. So you have two options to create fixture data. You can mash it into the client side, or you can generate on the server side. So there's this thing called fixture adapter in Ember, which is not finished, that allows you to generate some fixtures on the client side. They're really easy to create, but they can easily get out of sync as well. So your tests will be passing, but you know your API is actually changed. So that means they're fragile, and they don't really handle server-side computed attributes very well. So in our app, our serializers are a mixture of probably 50-50 with actual Rails model attributes and then some computed properties that we send over in order to simplify our lives. And that's much, much harder to do if you're creating all this fixture data by hand and storing it in your app. So we use built-in Rails stuff or rake task to generate this. We write fixtures to our database, then we shit it out into JSON, and then we load it to this adapter. Yeah, I apologize. Yeah, put a timer on that. How long did it take? 2 hours. So that's what we do. Pretty straightforward. It's simple. It works. It's nice. You don't have to worry about it. I maintain my fixtures in one place. I get all the magic of, if you like factory girl, stuff like that doesn't yet exist in the JavaScript world, although I'll mention something that there is, I think, later. So it covers models, serializers, the adapters. It's easy to maintain. It's a bit tricky to ensure Captain Sync, but not that hard. You just have to remember, I add a new model, I've got to go put it over here in my stuff, or if I change an attribute. It's also a little bit harder to get set up, but once it works, it's all really nice. So one thing that Joe talked about was, wouldn't it be great if we had a copy borrow equivalent in JavaScript that would look something like this? That would be awesome, but it doesn't exist. So we had some Q&A, which I included. TDD is somewhat hard because it's slow from a continual refresh process because it generates it has to recompile all of your JavaScript sort of. So like, yeah, you interpreted language, and then nope, we're going to go back and run through a compilation process again. So here's somebody who had said there's this thing called Rosie for JavaScript factories, kind of like factory girls, so you can like this. We use VCR as well, so VCR can record API stuff and store those responses and bring it back, so that's nice. Somebody asked about VCR, which we also use. Some of the bugs have come from asynchronicity. I don't know what that was, but that was a Q&A. So thanks. This is Joe stuff, and that's me. My name is Matt Rogish. So are there any questions about testing? I know it was super, super fast, but I know that I want to go places. So any questions on testing your Ember apps? Wow.
Sure. What are you using? Not Rails. Using Django. Sorry. I have no idea.
I mean, the same theory applies. Kagemusha requires Ruby, so you've got to have Ruby and Ruby gems set up. But after that, as long as you feed it the right stuff, you load your index to HTML up, you feed it all of your data, the theory will still work, but you need Ruby. Actually, I have any questions on that.
Awesome. Matt, thank you. That was great.